Hey guys, welcome back to TFL Classics. Now today we have a really big update around this truck behind me. This is Kase's truck, and Kase has put a ton of man hours to bring this thing up to something that is really cool, and we're going to tell you all about it. Now Kase, why don't you start with the cosmetic stuff, because last time you mentioned you did a full paint job on it, and it came out awesome.
Yeah, so, I mean, for spending a weekend on painting this truck, really happy with the way that it came out, because if you have limited time painting trucks, as we figured out in the past, can be difficult to get it just right. And as you might have seen in videos prior, when I bought this truck initially, yeah, cosmetically, it was not in great shape. The tires were old, starting to get dry rotted, the paint was terrible, and it didn't even have a factory bed on it, so it took a lot to get it to this point.
Now I also noticed too, you got a new bumper, you got the new honeycomb grille here, and tell me about the little Parisian headlights or fog lights.
Well, yeah, so yeah, like you mentioned, kind of French almost in their style. I just love amber running lights. I think they're really cool. And so this truck was not optioned originally with fog lights. I'm pretty sure it was available in 1994 for reasons we'll actually check out in a little bit. But this bumper is original to the truck, which we had to replace these plastics because they were really terrible. But in order to mount fog lights to the bumper, we had to make studs to mount them too, because the bumper wasn't optioned with fog lights. So we welded a little bit of threaded rod back there to mount them, and then had to run the wires, bought a wiring harness with that's got a fuse and a relay and everything. And then to actually flip them on, I found a factory fog light switch, so we're not using a out of place looking aftermarket cheap switch to turn them on. And so it was kind of a process figuring out how to wire up that factory fog light switch, because it just, yeah, there's no schematics for anything like that.
Okay, so the biggest change is actually under the hood. So why don't you pop it and we'll talk about what he's done to this 94 Ram Heavy Duty, because these have the legendary inline-6 Cummins diesel engine, which are known for being infinitely tunable. Kase bought this truck stock. I was pretty sure he'd leave it stock forever, but now he's gone down the route of really producing some horsepower. So what have you done here, Kase?
Yeah, so it's a lot more than I could even call to memory all at once, but some of the biggest things in terms of the engine internals, we had to do a beefier valve spring, a 60-pound valve spring. That lets this rev up higher when it's paired with a governor spring in the mechanical fuel pump here. So basically this truck, it used to rev up to only about 2250 RPMs. Now it can actually manage to go over 3000 RPMs. So that's a huge difference right there. We also did stronger head studs to make sure it's all held together better. New rocker pedestals. In the front end, we did a fix for something called KDP, which is this dowel pin that can back out over time. It's one of the few Achilles heels with these engines. That's all sorted out. Ton of different things on the internals as well, including a higher performance South Bend clutch. But then we went ahead, once we had the internals of the engine sorted out, bolted on a ton of stuff to the outside. You can see this Banks twin ram intake, which distributes air better to all the cylinders. Originally it's just got one intake horn that hits right around the second and third cylinder, which means the first, fifth, and sixth don't get as much air. So this just makes sure that all the cylinders have more even amounts of air. New BD diesel 3-piece exhaust manifold. This S300 turbo that I actually bought from David, who you would have seen if you've been watching TFL Classics a decent amount. You know, new downpipe, new alternator, new starter, even more modifications to the fuel pump, just a ton of stuff.
So the cool thing is that Kase actually has some mechanical ability, unlike myself, and your roommate is a diesel mechanic, right?
Yeah, so he was actually a professional mechanic for a while, so all the really heavy lifting with this project, especially a lot of the engine internals, that all kind of fell into his hands, and he really enjoys working on projects like these, and I kind of got to learn a lot from watching him do some of the really scary work, like pulling apart the motor itself.
Okay, so what was the hardest part of installing all these Go Fast goodies? Like, what was the part that took the longest?
honestly, messing with the top end, doing the head studs and the valve springs, that's probably what took the most time, because especially when you get towards that 6-cylinder, which is kind of buried under the windshield there, really difficult to get your hands in there to do what you need to do. And some of those little keepers and retainers that hold the valve springs in place are really kind of small and hard to get exactly right.
So the cool thing about the Cummins is you can do a ton to them. Do you know how much power they'll take on like stock internals? I mean, what's the first thing that'll typically break on these?
It's a good question. I mean, if you have a manual transmission truck, the first things that you need to do are a clutch that can hold more power, because even from the factory, these trucks, if they have a manual transmission, they make less power than the automatics, and that's even true with newer Cummins engines, obviously not 5th gens, which don't have a manual option, but they usually detune the manuals because those clutches can't hold much. So the first thing you need to do is a beefier clutch, and then of course head studs. But other than that, there's really not a ton on this motor itself that you have to do to prepare it for more power.
So I think from the factory, I have to look it up, but it was like, what, 150 horsepower?
So this was 175 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque.
From the factory?
Yeah.
This is going to be the part where all the commenters are going to come out and yell at us. Do you have any estimates based on what the manufacturer claims that the current output is?
Well, yeah, so in terms of current output, I'd say the butt dyno has it around 300 to 400 horsepower and 600 to 700 pound-feet of torque. I mean, if I floor it in third gear, especially if I'm going uphill a little bit, I have a hard time keeping traction.
So that's going to be one we're going to have to put on a dyno for sure to see, what the final number is. But there's a lot of other things too that I noticed you did. So you have a new alternator, right?
Yeah, so new alternator and new batteries. When this alternator went, it kind of took the batteries with it. I don't actually know how old those batteries were, but old enough that when that alternator went, the batteries did too, and this was expensive. I wanted to get good batteries because here in Colorado it gets cold, and I used this truck to go fly fishing, skiing, everything, so I needed to have plenty of cold cranking amps.
All right, now for the part that Kase definitely doesn't want to talk about, but it's very important, so I can't wait to hear the number. Do you have any idea how much you have into the engine alone?
So including the clutch and the batteries, all of that, I mean, it's got to be, it's probably around $8,000.
The engine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing what you can do to these engines if your budget allows it, because they're just so infinitely tunable, and there's just so much aftermarket support for it's a 5.9, right? The 5.9 liter.
Yeah, it's a 5.9, and honestly, at the moment, I'm not making as much power as most of this equipment can handle. So part of the reason that it's been as expensive as it has is because I'm gearing up to get this thing to almost 600 horsepower to the wheels.
So what's it going to take to double the horsepower?
A second turbo and a built fuel pump.
So yeah, this is interesting. Now this is kind of the heart of the beast, and you can see the fuel rails coming out that lead to the engine. But this little pump, it's called the P pump in the Cummins world, right?
Yeah, the P7100, and this is the biggest thing with the 12 valve. This is one of the main reasons that people love this engine, is because it's a mechanical fuel pump. So a lot of the electronic fuel pumps that have come after, like CP3s, they're not as sturdy as something that's obviously gear driven off the front of the engine. But at the moment, this is the factory fuel pump, and so the cam in it and the delivery valves in this pump are very mild, which means even though the rest of my fuel pump, or my fuel system, can flow a lot more, got bigger injectors and an air dog lift pump, it's all getting choked down right here. So if I have a built fuel pump, this turbo should be able to get me a lot more power than it's making at the moment. There's one more cool item. This is something that I now keep in my center console because it actually fits in there perfectly. This was sent to me by a viewer named Mike Stanford, who was kind enough to just reach out because he wanted to give me a cool piece of literature to keep with my truck. And this just has a bunch of really cool, nostalgic little items in it. and it's actually in really nice shape overall. So this would have been something that you could have gotten at the dealership when the truck was new, and you can see it tells you all about the features, where you can sit an old computer on the truck. You can see a picture of this really funky red version of my interior, which is something else, and it gives actually a really cool range of different information on these trucks. There's even a section of it further down here that shows you all the power and torque curves with the different engine options that you get in these trucks. So right here you can see mine would be the 5.9 turbo diesel with the manual, 175 horsepower, 420 pound-feet of torque. Not a lot, not nearly enough. The reason I'm pretty sure that fog lights were available on the 1994 truck is because this booklet right here is, or should be, from 1994 when this truck first came out. And right here you can see some of the optional accessories, one of which was a projector style fog light. And on top of that, if you look at this truck right here, how cool are those modifications? I've tried really hard to find one of these push bars at the front, and it's pretty much impossible.
You bought these tires off our buddy David. Didn't you do the steering stabilizer?
Well, so the steering stabilizer is still the same, but we had to level the truck to fit these 35-inch tires, and eventually I want to do a nicer suspension system all around, but we just leveled it cheaply with a puck, which is good enough for now because obviously I'm spending money in a lot of areas on this truck. We got Bilstein 5100 shocks on it, and we did an adjustable track bar which recenters the axle after you lift the truck.
I also like the cab lights. That was cool. I like that. You didn't buy it with those, right?
Yeah, so at the moment I've got, we installed those cab lights on there and the fog lights. So at the moment I've got, 9 amber lights when you're looking at the front of the truck.
And then in the back here, so this was green last time I saw it. Now it's white, which looks so much better. And then the rest is gone, but I noticed you also did the bed lining. So what was the bed lining experience like?
That was really easy. We bought just one of those cheap little wrapper liner kits, and it doesn't turn out as thick as like a Line-X coating, but it's good enough. I like the texture that you get out of it. Really easy to spray. It took me, I don't know, including sanding down the bed, it took maybe 2 hours to bed line the truck. You have to mask everything off and all that, but it's really pretty easy.
So did you do new taillights?
Yeah, so I mean pretty much everything that you're looking at on the outside of the truck we've messed with. That's a new rear bumper because the utility box that it had on it when I bought it, it didn't have a factory bumper. The hitch receiver was also built into the utility box that the truck came with, so we had to put this hitch receiver on there. New tailgate because the tailgate that was on this bed originally was trashed. And the thing that I've really enjoyed about this process is that my roommate and I have done every part of this ourselves. There's only 3 things that we didn't do in our driveway, and that is we didn't mount the tires on the wheels because we don't have a great machine for that. We didn't do the alignment, and I didn't replace the windshield because the original one was cracked.
Now, I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
Why is there a cheese grater on the back of your truck?
Oh, this is classic.
There's so many areas. Just like you could have like a folk band play. One of those like those washboard instruments.
I love this, man. This to me is just so classic, second gen Ram, and I had to go back to that because I think it's really nostalgic and I love the look of it.
So this is my favorite Kase thing that he did. Nobody else would ever do this, but his radio didn't work. So to replace it, he got the exact same radio. You want to show him?
Yeah. So basically, and I mentioned this in the last video and got a couple comments from people asking where I got this radio from. I just bought it off of Jegs, so it's a remanufactured factory stereo head unit. So it looks like it belongs in the truck. It lights up the same color as everything else in the dash, but it's also got Bluetooth. So that little blue button right there, you put a cassette in the stereo, you press that button, and you can Bluetooth to your phone. So it's got as much of the modern functionality as I need, but it doesn't look out of place.
So what else have you done in the inside that is new?
Are
your window switches fixed?
Yeah. So all of these switches, door locks, everything, everything on the interior works. And at certain points, we've had everything in this interior apart except for the carpets, the seats, and the rear storage bin. So I had to cant the dashboard back at one point to get to the bottom of the windshield. I've had a bunch of the components out of the dashboard itself. We've had the door cards out, we've had the headliner down, all of these plastics along here, replacing the speakers. Yeah, I mean, I've had the shifter out. You know, it's pretty much come apart completely and gone back together a couple times.
So do you have any idea how many hours you have into it?
You know, Connor and I were trying to figure that out the other day. It's well over 100.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like half of what we do in our free time is just mess with this truck. Our
Just
neighbors
fix
hate
the
us.
truck. That's so funny. All right, well, let's bring it around to the front here, and I have a last couple questions for you, Kase. So you bought this truck for $8,500.
$8,000.
$8,000. So the most expensive part was the engine, I take it?
Well, yeah, in terms of the entire process, because really, exterior-wise, I actually made money going back to a factory bed because I sold the old utility box, and getting this factory bed was less expensive. That was like $300-something bucks. So the cosmetics of the truck hasn't costed too many thousands of dollars.
So what about parts availability? Is it hard to find parts for it?
Not at all. That's actually one of the really nice things. Like yourself, I've got a vintage Mercedes back home, and finding parts for those, as you very well know, is virtually impossible. This, on the other hand, I mean, you could almost build one of these from scratch with all the parts that you can find online.
Let me clarify, his is much more vintage and much cooler. But would you do this again? I mean, are you happy you went down this route? I mean,
you know what's funny, and I know Alex, who's actually behind the camera, mentioned this at one point. He knew that I liked this truck a lot when I completely stopped riding my motorcycle. Because I used to ride my bike in the winter, below freezing, didn't matter. I would take it down the highway, loved riding it every single day. And since I bought this truck, I've ridden my motorcycle maybe 10 or 15 times.
I'm a little concerned, though, because we have a producer, Zach, now, and he's talking about getting, like, a 90s heavy-duty truck.
Nice.
And the whole parking lot, I mean, we're not going to be able to park anything in here. It's just going to be wall-to-wall with 90s heavy-duty trucks at this rate. But, last question for you. Initially, you bought this truck, and you were planning on body swapping this with an old, like, M37, right?
Yeah, I've got a 1952 Dodge M37 that's not running, but the body is in good shape. And that's a truck, one of the vehicles that I learned to drive on. So it's got a lot of sentimental value, and I want to save it. I don't want that truck to, you know, just end up rotting in a yard. So ideally what we would love to do is find a 12-valve Cummins truck with a rotted out body that we could swap this body onto, so we can still save a 12-valve Cummins truck. And then, because I like my truck, I like that it's been taken care of, and we've done all the modifications to this engine and chassis, I want to throw the body of my 1952 truck on this chassis.
Now, that's interesting, because the plan has changed considerably. Initially, there was no second truck in the plan case, and now that he's made it so nice, he's like, I gotta hold on to it. That's
yeah,
funny.
exactly, because, you know, we've put enough effort into this body and everything that it wouldn't make any sense to just, you know, let this become scrap. So this body will be able to save another second-gen Ram, and then, this chassis is going to be donated to saving a really cool old Army truck.
Well, there you guys have it. The mega update around Kase's Dodge. I guess back then they were Dodge Rams, weren't they?
It is. It says Dodge on the steering wheel.
Officially Dodge Ram. Well, let us know what you think in the comments section below, and be sure to stay tuned. We've got a lot more coming with this truck. It's too nice now to really break it, so we're going to be a little bit careful with it, but definitely be sure to stay tuned, because I'd like to find like a Ford of this vintage and put them up against each other. I think that'd be really cool.
Oh, and it is, at the end of the day, it's still a truck, it's still got dents in it, and yeah, I'm not going to treat it too delicately.